I believe I must be on. My name is Ron Vogel. I am president of an organization, a nonprofit organization called the National Design Alliance, and national team leader for our premier program called Reimagine America's Schools. And we are very excited about today's program and happy that such a great audience has joined us. Over 300 registrations today, which is great because as we're beginning to come out of the pandemic and we're beginning to have more face-to-face meetings, maybe we will finally put Zoom behind us. But here we are today, gathering leaders in education and design from across the country to talk about the future of cities and the future of schools. And we will be talking specifically about a concept that we are advancing, education-centered community reinvestment. And we'll be talking about that more as we get into the program today. But before we do, let's do some ground rules, is sort of what we do when we have Zooms. First, the chat section. If you participate in chat, we ask that you make your comments to everyone so that all of the panelists and all of the attendees will be able to see your notes. For specific questions, we ask that you use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we'll do our very best to respond to your questions as we can. And to make things as interactive as possible, we'd love it if you would Zoom where you're Zooming in from today. Just tell us what city you're in and make sure it goes to everybody. And this is mostly so that the other attendees can see where you're coming from. As last count, we had over 40 states represented and 9 foreign countries. So welcome to the Zoom world. And also, my colleagues will be posting questions from time to time and topics in chat. And so watch for those questions and topics and join in the conversation. Now, you're going to hear a lot of Atlanta connections today, a lot of Georgia references. And that's because, well, as you can see from the poster behind me, although I'm based out of New York today, I'm in Atlanta. Yesterday, we met with the mayor. The day before, we met with the education leadership at the Atlanta Public Schools. Previously, we've met with leaders in Clayton County Public Schools and Park Forest, the community of Park Forest. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a big announcement, but that's not going to occur until the end of today's summit, so stand by. So there are going to be 2 areas of focus in our dialogue today. One is the whole notion of school design, but we're broadening the lens. And when we think about school design, especially in underserved neighborhoods, low-performing schools, we really believe that you have to look at the school and the community that the school is in. So our program focus is on education-centered community reinvestment, where we look at the neighborhood, the public schools, the libraries as elements in a singular ecosystem. So that's kind of one area of focus. But the other is really looking at change and how we manage change. Because it's tough, as we all know from our experiences, it's tough for agencies and individuals and organizations to step out of their silo and work together jointly to reimagine how they can coordinate their work to lift up opportunities for students, families, all members of the community. So the second area of our focus really will be dealing with strategies of change. And we're looking at the question of change through the lens of 3 different points of view. First, through the lens of philanthropy. We have 3 foundation executives that we're going to be visiting with. And the second lens is through the lens of innovative social entrepreneurs who are educators. We have a panel of educators who each have remarkable stories about how they have found an innovative path to pursue their passion of educating youth. And 3, the third area of focus that we're looking at is through the lens of urban planning. We're very excited to have added to our agenda the new director of urban planning for the city of Boston, but more about that individual later. Our 3 panelists for the foundation panel We caught up with them earlier this week and pre-recorded our interview with them. But let me go ahead and introduce them before we signal the start of the video. We have Katie Knight, who is Executive Director of the Siegel Family Endowment out of New York. Ruby Sullivan, who's Senior Associate for Educational Achievement at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. She's based here in Atlanta. And Gabby Sheely, Executive Director of the Tull Charitable Foundation, also here in Atlanta. So we had a wonderful conversation together, and I look forward to seeing it because I didn't see it before. So now I'm going to get to watch it along with you. Let's run the video. So I am so pleased to have been able to be joined by three brilliant leaders in the philanthropy world. And as I was saying just briefly before the recording started, the focus of this panel from the perspective of Reimagine America's Schools is this. We have been trying to address, solve, improve, elevate problems in our cities for decades. And we've used strategies over and over again that have proven to be unsuccessful and maybe even worse, have really and sometimes contributed to a worse situation for underserved communities and high challenge populations. So, you know, the pandemic has been a wake-up call for us. And if there's a silver lining in the pandemic, it is we've got to do a better job. And so we're engaged in this conversation with civic leaders today, really looking at the question of leadership. How do we change the way we address the challenges and opportunities in our cities? Those of us at Reimagine America's Schools and other colleagues around the country observe that the role of philanthropy is evolving. And our philanthropic foundations aren't merely doing grant making, but they are becoming more involved in helping shape a vision for a community, help convene the community leaders, create a culture of cooperation and working together. And so today we have this panel of foundation executives, Ruby in Atlanta, Gabby in Atlanta, and Katie Knight, who is in New York City, but seems to have a fondness for Atlanta. And we want to explore with them the view of their role and how we can more successfully address new strategies, innovative strategies in cities for the benefit of all citizens. I had an opportunity to have coffee with Ruby a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta, and as I was saying just a moment ago, she is not a low energy person. So I would love to kind of just start the conversation off. And Ruby, if you would be willing to start us off just with some general thoughts about some of the issues that I just mentioned in my opening comments. Ruby? Sure, absolutely.
So I started my career as a teacher in Atlanta public schools. And, back then, this was some time ago, former lifetime, we were taught that the schools were built like a fortress model with the community, right? We were taught to do well in spite of the community, not that we were a part of the community. So it's time for us to, bust that wall down, right? And one of the ways that I think that we do that work here in Atlanta is by working directly as stewards for the community. I consider the community to be the funders as opposed to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, but these are the community funds. What are the needs that are happening in the communities that we can bring other partners in through convenings, for example, through influencing policy change, especially when it comes to race equity. That's been very important for us in Atlanta, both at the mayor's office as well as in the school system. We right now currently have a mayor's office and a city office that get along really well, and we're very excited about that. So Gabby and I are definitely going to be taking the bull by the horns there and running with that one. But we do a lot of work around really truly understanding. I'm looking out the window right now because I sit in the neighborhood planning unit V, which is the community that we serve and as the Atlanta Civic Site, and really making sure that we're listening to the community. And we don't expect schools to do everything. We learned at the beginning of the pandemic, LA Unified, I think, became one of the largest food provider in the nation at the beginning of the pandemic. Our schools should be focused on teaching and learning. So where are the places that philanthropy can stand in that gap for our schools, be it housing, food, nutrition, technology, those types of things. So I think understanding all of those needs, how they affect the schools, and then busting down that fortress wall to become an integral part of the community as opposed to trying to do well in spite of the community. It's insulting and it's dangerous.
And I would say, word partnerships is, a resounding, theme within our foundation in terms of really looking to the nonprofit community, as well as government, as well as the schools, to be partnering together to try to address the challenges that they are, particularly the school leaders, are lifting up. And I think that, as Ruby was saying, the helping to support, there's so many different opportunities for other organizations that are also working with the same families that are attending those schools, to be partnering together, and where we can help provide some of that glue is a role that our foundation has played. And I think, one of the examples that, Ruby and I have talked about is, an organization that is helping to provide legal advocacy work to families who might be facing eviction, and as a strategy to help keep their families housed in the same location, and their students are not having their children not having to leave the school that they're in. And so, some of those, there are a lot of assets in each community that we're trying to help, provide, again, some of that glue to keep all of those players working together and have the resources that they need in order to support what's happening for the students attending those schools.
And I think just picking up on both those threads, as a national funder with a fondness for Atlanta, I like that, Ron. We saw an opportunity to think about ways that we could engage with our foundation friends and with communities and bring to the table some of what we've learned in the national landscape, and learn with and alongside and from work that's deeply grounded and rooted in community, and figure out how some of these strategies and theories of change that we're seeing out in the wild actually look when they're implemented in a place. And Atlanta is a great place for that right now, because I think, to Ruby's point, there's so much opportunity with alignment, the stars coming together. There's a lot of energy around tech growth and new businesses and just the growth of the city economically. But there's also challenges within that. And some of those challenges were familiar to me, hearing about them from the perspective of someone who's worked in New York through some similar challenges and looked nationally at some similar challenges. So we really wanted to engage at this moment and figure out if there is a model that we can also represent back to philanthropy more broadly on how to partner effectively with that sort of national, local scale together.
I should put a footnote. Why are we talking about Atlanta? In partnership with Siegel, Reimagine America's Schools is deep in conversation with new Mayor Dickens and Superintendent Herring with the Atlanta Public Schools, putting together an initiative to identify an Atlanta neighborhood and school and we would send teams of urban planners and designers in and do the work pro bono, but help the city and the school district develop a vision for that neighborhood school combination. We'll be hearing more about that in the summit agenda toward the end of the agenda. And then also we're doing a similar program in Clayton County, Georgia, which is an adjoining county system, so that we're doing both urban and non-urban initiatives in in the Atlanta area. So we have a high degree of interest in Atlanta right now. We believe that this is a beta test for a concept that other mayors and school districts may choose to embrace. That's what our hope is, and we're excited about that. So that just as quick background on why we're all talking about Atlanta so much. So,
I want to piggyback on something that Katie brought up around the tech growth in Atlanta. I really think there are so many folks who are brought into Atlanta, resourced into Atlanta from other places for economic opportunity to fill jobs, wherein our citizens, regular citizens, those of us like myself who came up in Atlanta public schools, the jobs, those tech jobs we're not preparing them for those tech jobs. And so when we think about like the Center for Equity and Social Justice in Atlanta Public Schools and their work to ensure that more of our students have access to advanced placement courses, for example, in the STEM fields that have traditionally not had access to those courses, and how that might then lend itself to pathway conversations, right? And then how those pathway conversations then connect to the workforce and connect to this world of economic opportunity. So it's that intersection of education and economic opportunity that I think it's so important. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, I think nationally, but we're definitely feeling it here in Atlanta. So we have more and more of our legacy residents who are being pushed out, while we are also recruiting in these new tech folks, right, that are not homegrown, if you will. So I'd like to see us all work together to disrupt that, right? How do we disrupt those odds? How do we change those odds rather than expecting our legacy residents and families to beat the odds, to be able to get on those pathways to those high-paying jobs that are right here in our own city? And we can't do that if we're continually moving folks out of the city and also not even giving access to high rigor courses, for example, or to, you name it, advanced placement, or just to equitable opportunities, right? So that's one of my, that's a big concern that I have as an Atlantan.
Well, and I imagine a world where the sort of sales pitch that a company or a potential relocation hire gets on Atlanta and the reality that, I've been pitched as a funder that's, look at all this opportunity for you to fund don't haves. I want to see those two realities come closer together, right? The sales pitch, shiny version, and the look at what's missing deficit mindset. Neither one is quite right, but there's a real opportunity for the reality of Atlanta to reflect something that is great for the people that have lived there, been invested, and want to stay.
And that sounds like it's sort of at the core of your approach, Ron, in terms of, the strategy that your team is looking to play in helping to identify what are all of the assets, right, that we have here that can and that you can make more available to the students inside that particular school. And so, being able to tap into all that Atlanta has to offer for the students that doesn't have to be inside the four walls of that school, right, is going to be, a really, really, I think, powerful process that could, be a model for other folks in terms of thinking about, how do we really leverage, all of the different assets that folks have around the city.
I think one of the questions that we are going to be thinking about is the dynamic of a local national partnership. Before we started the recording, Gabby, you had mentioned, about parachuting in, and philosophically and in every other way, I think both Siegel and Reimagine America Schools gets that. We don't see ourselves as the folks that are going to give Atlanta the answers, but we may have some processes that kind of help draw those conclusions. But forming a relationship between national and local players, I think is something that has to be thought about and really treated with intentionality, not just casually prance in. And to a point you made, Gabby, before the recording about whose voice is being represented in this dialogue. Where does the facilitation come in? How do you build authentic community support? And so these are questions that I know that we will be asking to be sure that we don't stumble in ways that would be damaging to the ultimate opportunities.
We have a report out, just to plug an Annie Casey report, right, related to Pittsburgh Yards, which is where I'm sitting right now in the NIA building, NIA meaning purpose. Pittsburgh Yards was established for Black entrepreneurship and to build Black wealth on the south side of Atlanta and to create jobs on the south side of Atlanta. We also have many of our education nonprofits that sit in this space, but the report is very focused on the community's influence on how this property, the sacred ground that I sit on right now, that was originally the agricultural programming for what was Clark University, when it's now Carver High School. But when Clark first opened, this was the sacred ground where both agricultural programming happened, as well as where the students were fed from the grounds on which I sit, right? So it was very important to our community to have a voice. They have been, and it's more than a voice, they have led this creation of this space that I sit in, this space that is full of over 120 Black entrepreneurs, and how the space will be used and activated even for education. So we have some lessons learned in that very recent report, if anyone wants to take a look at it, but on how the community was engaged way beyond just, the traditional, we have an advisory and we make a decision and we put the decision in front of a subset of community members that show up for every community meeting and they say yay or nay to something we've already decided. No, that's not how we do business here. That's not how we are, how we honor the community. So really trying to make sure that they are leaders from the beginning. Same to be said with our youth. I mean, we're talking about schooling, right? What youth are at the table? Who are at the table when we're talking about this redesign and reimagining of schools? What are our youth telling us? It was a long time ago when I was in school. I need to hear, from more than just my own students, my own biological children, my own N of 2, N equals 2 children at home that are 24 and 18. What are our youth saying now that are experiencing school, especially post-COVID, with the technology challenges and all of the challenges that our schools are experiencing right now?
I feel like it's provocative thoughts like that make me excited about the national local partnership piece, because I sit here saying to myself, exactly, right? That's what we care about. I think we care about infrastructure, broadly speaking. And one of the elements of that I get really jazzed about is the nature of bureaucracy and all the little places where you can make super impactful change. And you just have to have the will. And I think the notion of the public comment period is what I feel like Ruby's getting at. Yes. And this idea, like, here's the plan. Tell us why we shouldn't do this and, file your complaints. That's not how we should engage community in designing anything, especially not school environments, right? We've got to start way farther upstream if we want people to do more than just complain. And if we want to actually have community input, it can't just be a public comment period for complaints. That's
right. That's exactly right. I think that power dynamic that we talked about earlier too, I think there's we try and get rid of that power dynamic. It's hard to do as a funder, but when you're convening in a room, you try and take that funder hat off and sit with your nonprofits and sit with your partners and sit with your community members, elbow to elbow in the work. We really try and remove that power dynamic. And I think the same is true for local national funders as well, and from government agency to community members. We all have to remember that power dynamic is present, and teachers to students, principals to teachers. How do we disrupt that power dynamic such that we are getting authentic and real proximity to the issues that we're trying to address, right?
Well, and building students and teachers into this initiative is central to our DNA. Kind of use the unusual voices, and it's amazing. We did a big project in Spokane before the pandemic, and we had our student involvement was the driving force behind the strategies and ideas that came out of the whole process. So it's fun to have students involved.
It's fun. You have to be careful.
A lot more fun than school boards.
And you have to be careful. You have to make sure, we're not using our students, our community members as pawns or to parade in front of funders or nonprofits. What are our community members and youth getting in turn, right? And when are we really ready to listen? Because oftentimes, especially our youth will tell us things that we might not be quite ready to implement. We might not have been quite ready to hear, but do not bring them together and say you're going to listen to them and then not listen to them. You have to be ready to listen and allow them to see that those words move into action by adults. Our youth already don't trust us, and they have every reason not to at this point. So how do we build that trust? And I think it's by listening and moving their words to action. That's where our power sits, right?
One of our panelists in a recent conversation talked about change, and she said, change moves at the speed of trust. And as we come into Atlanta, that's another part of the focus is we really need to think about, if we're thinking about change, how do we build a sincere engagement, an authentic engagement that makes people feel like this is something where their voice and their vision can be heard. So with 5 minutes left, I want to ask a kind of a round robin question, and that is, how optimistic are you that we can find the change that we seek? Are things different enough now somehow that we feel more hopeful? The work ahead is hard. There's a lot of disruption, Ruby, as you said. But how optimistic are we that we can actually change reality in the communities that we're talking about?
I'm very optimistic, but I think it really depends on the partners and the way that you're bringing people together at the table. And so, I'm super grateful to have all of these partners on the screen today, because I think there's a similarity in approach to, the foundations we are way in the backseat. And, we could be helping to convene or to help connect for a new, organization that's coming into the city to help really, build and connect more of the assets that we have here for students in the communities that they live in. And at the same time, I think it's super, I think that, we have consistently said that, at our foundation, I think my colleagues share this as well, that, who the folks are who are on the ground living and working in those communities are the folks that we have to have at the table. And that we don't come in with a predetermined sort of approach to way we're solving the problem. And that we can really be that connector and that convener to help bring people together, to have that space, to have the dialogue that we've been talking about today.
I'm incredibly hopeful and optimistic, although people who know me will remind that cautious optimism is as high as I go. My optimism scale tops out at cautious optimism. But I think that cautious optimism in this instance is really, I think there's a commitment that we have to shared power and to thinking differently about the role of philanthropy, to thinking differently about the path forward. It doesn't seem like we're holding on too tight to the way things have been done before, because we're able to see now with incredible clarity the way that has failed us and failed our young people. And I'm also really thrilled to be, in the company of women on this panel, because I think women are really good at figuring out how to redirect power, and women are behind, some of the largest movements in our history. And I think philanthropy as a movement is a really interesting perspective to have on the work that we're doing.
I would be happy to follow you three anywhere. And believe me,
careful.
that's probably exactly what's happening. In addition to the three of you, we have Ann Kramer, who has got me by the ear and taking me around town. So, and Katie, you'll be making a trip to Atlanta soon, I hope. So we'll get to have some FaceTime with these potential partners and others. The Atlanta work is not a long, long way away. We're in Atlanta, actually, when we air this summit, we'll be making the call from Atlanta. We're meeting with the mayor's office and the schools again this week. We'll be announcing our partnership with Atlanta before the end of May. And we're announcing our partnership in Clayton County on May 19th. So this is not something that we're going to plan to do in 3 years. One of the things that I love about Siegel is that we are action-oriented. We're not an academic effort. We're not a theoretical group. So we want to work on the ground and work with the Atlanta community. And we hope create new models, again, that benefit Atlanta and the students and families of Atlanta, but also can inspire others around the country. And certainly with the kind of leadership we have here, it gives me great hope that we might actually be able to make something remarkable happen. So thank you for your passions and your commitments and your optimism. And we look forward to our next conversations. And now we'll go back to the live summit.
Thank you.
Well, hello again. That was a fun group, and I think quite often we think of grant makers when we think of foundations, and that's certainly an important part of the role they play. But as a local community leader in your community, when you think about who might be able to get the players to the table, it may well be your foundation leadership in town and the ask of them is not about money, but it's just about using their convening capability to help create dialogue across multiple silos. So thank you for sharing with us from that panel. And we're going to take a look at, let's see, it's the education panel. So by the way, I made a wisecrack about school boards. And if there are any school board members out there, please don't take offense. I was on the Oklahoma City School Board for 10 years. Several of those years as president. So I'm kind of make fun of school boards, but it's only out of love. So change can take place in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it's just the power of the individual. And we have a panel of extraordinary individuals, I think, coming up next, a group of educators that will explore the strategies they've used to bring change in education in their communities. Let's see. I guess, do we bring the panelists on, or do I introduce them? I guess I'll start introducing them, and we'll find out. We have 5 members of this panel. There he is, Josh Elder, Director and Head of Grant Making at Siegel Family Endowment, but a history we'll hear about in education. Ashley Bryan Flores from Dallas, Senior Director of the Child Poverty Action Lab, but a former Teach for America teacher. I'm told that Ashley is having some technology issues, so she may be joining us in a bit. James Piperbond, President and CEO and founder of Living Classrooms Foundation. He's based in Baltimore, but they also have campuses in presence in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. James Cooper from my hometown. He's an educator, an elected member of the Oklahoma City Council. And Jane Quinn, until recently was vice president for community schools at Children's Aid, where she directed the National Center for Community Schools. She is based in New York City and one of the great national leaders in the community school movement. So let's see. I only am seeing Josh and Ron now. Oh, there's everyone else. Okay. So while I figure out my technology, I'd like to set up a few ground rules for our discussion. I would rather not this be just a Q&A, but more of a free exchange. The focus that I would love to hear from you is the path that you've taken to figure out how to bring change and innovation in the world that you're in. And Councilman Cooper, if I could start with you, and may I call you James? I heard your story in Oklahoma City a few weeks ago when the Congress for New Urbanism held their national meeting there. And you have forged a path of change in Oklahoma City that I found exciting and inspirational. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about the strategies you have used to bring change to your communities and your schools.
Yeah, thanks. And appreciate the opportunity to join everyone. So I think there are kind of two major things I'd want everyone to think about at the start of what I have to say, which is one, you might recall from the national news in 2018, Oklahoma had a historic teacher walkout. So I think that's one thing to consider as a framing. And then the other one would be we at the city level here in Oklahoma City, our capital city for Oklahoma, have something that some of you might be familiar with, but others of you might not. And it's called MAPS. And that is a 1 penny dedicated sales tax that the city of Oklahoma City began in 1993, voter approved. Oklahoma is unique in the sense that we restrict all of our municipalities at the state level in terms of revenue sources. We restrict them to sales tax. So that means that our municipalities can only access property taxes, for instance, really about every 10 years to do infrastructure improvements for our streets, sidewalks, parks, libraries, drainage, these sorts of things. So we really rely on the sales tax, which, as many of you also know, is a regressive tax, particularly for working class, middle class folk. So in 2018, around my birthday, sadly, we had the walkout. And we have not done anything like that in, just decades. And it was teachers, students, support staff, families. We literally saw people walk from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is about an hour and a half drive from Oklahoma City. People walked the turnpike to get to Oklahoma City. By the thousands. It was a big deal. And they gave us right before the walkout to try and stop it a $6,000 raise. But just so we're very clear, teachers were starting pay was about $31,000. Texas was $20,000 more than that. So we lose teachers to Texas. When we lose teachers, that means we lose the quality mentorship that our students deserve, support staff even less pay. And so for those 2 weeks of the walkout, state legislatures would hand us donuts, but then say, whoops, nothing else we can do for you. And I just remembered that at the city level, we had done 3 previous iterations of the MAPS programs. It's where we fund specific projects over a temporary span of time, 7 years, starting, as I said, in 1993. And you have to keep in mind also, we had 5 failed bond attempts before that in the 70s and 80s. You couldn't convince anyone to raise a tax here in Oklahoma City. It was really bad. And finally, with MAPS, we said, well, here are 6 projects we want to set aside with this 1 penny sales tax. And we revitalized a dead downtown, just completely brought it back to life. We did a second maps for kids, where we went in and actually addressed the quality of the schools themselves, the condition of their buildings. Maps is for capital projects. It's not for operations. And it's debt free, right? You build as you collect the tax. And so you collect about $120 million a year. MAPS 3 gave way to a new streetcar system downtown, 4 new senior wellness centers, a giant downtown park. And I said, okay, well, I'm a middle school teacher. I want to use MAPS 4 to address the mental health crisis in our schools. And that's how we ended up in MAPS 4 once I ran for office, knocked doors for 8 months. We ended up with 4 brand new youth centers that we're going to see built over the next several years of MAPS 4. And ever the teacher, in December, when the contract came to look at request for information to see who could possibly operate it, missing in that request for information was a single word about mental health, not one word. And thankfully, I caught it, and I made sure not only did they put mental health in that language, but that they specified that any operator doing work with our 4 new youth centers, that they needed to have a background in adverse childhood experiences. And I'll just conclude with that by saying that Oklahoma has, as again, many of you might know, the highest adverse childhood experience scores in the nation. We are number 1 in traumas for our kids. Our infant mortality rates are high. It's really, really bad. And that's why our kids can't focus in school, because they're dealing with traumas in their neighborhoods. So with MAPS 4, we're going to be able to give kids a place to go after school, on the weekends, during breaks. And then with MAPS 4, we made record investments, $87 million in sidewalks, bike lanes, new reliable public transportation systems, because if we can improve the environment outside of those schools for our kids, that's when we're going to start seeing them not only survive, but thrive.
So James's leadership has been a part of that, but I love the fact that he was a teacher that didn't feel like he was having enough influence over the quality of life of students, so he ran for city council. And, you know, it's attractive because it's a high-paying job, I'm sure. Kidding, of course. What James Bond has done in Baltimore is a remarkable tale. But the Living Classrooms, James, is a great program that in many ways has taken the idea of education-centered community investment and put it to life. You know, in your strategies, and I know this is a multi-decade project for you, but could you identify 2 or 3 key change strategies that you think were the most important in helping you achieve the results that you have?
Well, Ron, thank you. And thanks for all the efforts that your team has helped us with over the past few years as well. Living Classrooms has been in operation for 35 years. And as the name implies, it's all about project-based learning by doing, experiential learning. And as we have embarked with helping we start the first charter school in Maryland 20 years ago, the Crossroads Middle School, and we're looking to expand that school. And thanks to the help of your organization, Ron, we've come up with some wonderful concepts and the Bloomberg Philanthropy support as well, whereby the growth of this school is going to be and it's a community-based school, but it's located right on the inner harbor of Baltimore. But we don't have a ton of land. But Living Classrooms is also, over to get back to your question, has looked at, and it also relates to some of the earlier panelists, we are very focused. We only go where we are asked to go. And Living Classrooms provides education, workforce development, health and wellness, and violence prevention programming, and has for over 3 decades. And so we've been invited into 6 different communities to have community centers where we provide out-of-school time programming for youth, summer programs, sports programs, emotional and social wellness programs. We have 2 Safe Street sites that are focused on social determinants of health and how we can have trauma-informed care teams. And we also have ships that are out on the Chesapeake Bay and the rivers here in Baltimore and Washington daily with groups of classrooms full of children to bring learning alive. So you start to think about all those ingredients, and as we look to expand our school, it's in many respects follows the school without walls theory of how can we partner, how can we facilitate partnerships. And we have a targeted investment zone area of 2.5 square miles, a place-based strategy similar to the Harlem Children's Zone that we've been working on for about 15 years in East Baltimore, with now have 100 partners. So to think about, as we grow our educational programming or expand the school from a middle school with 163 children to a K through 12, serving 500 children and their families, we are going to be utilizing all of the resources that surround this part of town. So that includes science classes at the National Aquarium and history classes at the Jewish Museum or the African American Museum, being able to have internships with all of the businesses that surround this campus, creating a transportation loop. And this is your team, Ron, helped come up with this idea, because we're fortunate. I'll be meeting tomorrow Kevin Plank, who's the chairman of Under Armour, who's been on our board, and up at our UA house, which is an amazing 30,000 square foot facility that has a music studio and gyms and turf field and workforce center. So we're going to, instead of trying to build a whole new campus for our new Crossroads school, Ron, with the help of your team, we came up with the idea of creating a transportation loop with electric buses that'll circle from the Inner Harbor area where our Crossroads school is based up to the UA house, going by those museums and facilities I just mentioned, all these opportunities. And so we will be able to utilize those sites to be able to provide incredible opportunities for learning for children. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Well, I think that a panel like this is a little like going to the cafeteria. You get a little of this and a little of that. And we're hearing a lot of stories, but I hope it just whets your appetite, and you can go online and learn more about living classrooms and the work that you've done in Baltimore and elsewhere. So thanks, James. And thanks for letting us be a part of your team and your vision. It's been a great experience for our folks to be a part of it. I've been watching Ashley's career path for several years. We first met up when she was with the Dallas Public Schools and was in charge of innovation and all things wonderful. And then she moved to the Child Poverty Action Lab. And I love your story, Ashley, because I believe that you've been seeking the place where you can have the greatest impact and influence in your career to support children and communities. And as you've looked at not only your own pathway, but the things that you've done that were successful in really helping change the bureaucracy that we deal with when we think about large urban or large public school systems. But share a little bit about your point of view for how you've made change happen in your career.
Well, thanks, Ron. So I am, as Ron mentioned, with the Child Poverty Action Lab, or CPAL, now in Dallas, but was formerly with the Dallas Independent School District. And in my current role at CPAL, we are sort of a backbone organization that works with our public agencies in the city. And we look for ways to capitalize on the intersectionality between our public agencies to support them to work collaboratively together on the same types of issues they're all facing. And a somewhat recent project that I think is relevant to this conversation was in partnership with the Dallas Independent School District, but which has sort of implications for other public agencies. Dallas ISD issued a $3.5 billion bond, and voters approved it in 2020, which was very exciting. But the district in the kind of pre-vote bond planning was very interested in thinking more big picture about how they could leverage place-based investments in neighborhoods that had been historically redlined to the benefit of students and their families. And so Dallas ISD took a very courageous and unprecedented step of saying within that bond package, we are going to set aside $40 million to make investments in 4 neighborhoods. And those investments will not explicitly be academic in nature, but rather will address some of the needs that are within each community that ultimately carry into the classrooms. And so CPAL got to be a partner with Dallas ISD in that thinking and planning. And it was this exciting opportunity to see a district think outside of the box, outside of their lane, and also to make a strong statement that schools alone can't do it, that there's this larger community around schools that we need to think carefully about. And so, the bond passed. And so now in the process of, with those 4 neighborhoods, identifying what are the unique needs or interests or wants of each community, and then thinking about what will be the built environment response. Is it a community center? Is it a new clinic? Is it a flex space that both students and their families can use? And so it was this opportunity for the district to really lead the way, I think, for our public agency partners to say, we're willing to get creative. What about you? And another piece of that bond was another set aside for joint projects with our other public agencies. So the district basically said, we'll come to the table with this amount of funding, city or housing authority. If you want to join us, let's do a joint project if you can kind of match this so that we can work together. And so the result has been really great conversation and early action around better connecting the dots between public agencies in service to kids and their families in Dallas. So that's one small example of a project that I got to be a part of, but that I think is really instructive to others. I've said before, it's one of my professional dreams that one day all of our public agencies will sit around a table and co-plan their bonds together so that they work in mutually reinforcing ways. And it felt like we got a little bit closer to that idea with the Dallas ISD's 2020 bond, but still lots to explore, lots of work to be done.
Ashley, thanks for sharing that. And that actually is an amazing story and is aligned with, I think, the work that we're talking about here in Clayton County and Atlanta. Maybe there'll be results that we can share with Dallas as we continue to work down these pathways. 2 more. This has turned out to be more of a speakers panel, but that's just the way it evolved. So we want to hear from Jane and Josh. Jane, I'd like to end with you because the capstone for all of this, in my mind, is the concept of community schools. And we believe that that's an essential strategy, especially, not just for underserved communities, but especially for those communities. Josh and I have been working together for a couple of years now. He's with Siegel, who is our funder, but also Josh is an educator. Josh, you've been involved in education in a lot of different ways. You've started schools. You've been involved internationally. When you think about strategies for change, strategies for innovation, are there examples, are there experiences that stand out in your mind in terms of strategies we might be able to learn from?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I think for me, I love the comment that was also just put in the chat by Abe that every school is a community school. And I think I couldn't agree more. I think I've been fortunate enough to work in environments in both the traditional public school system when I was in Virginia, and then in the charter school system in North Philadelphia when I was with KIPP, and internationally in South Africa. And I think that has been at the root of some of the successes and challenges, but truly trying to live that motto that the school is the community and the community is school. And it doesn't oftentimes work smoothly, nor should it. That's the society that we live in. We're going to have obstacles and challenges, but I think being in places that encourage the community to be a part of the school and that the school is in this community. And I think for me, that's when I have had, I think, the most success being an educator, being in school leadership, And now on the funder side, looking for examples and looking for models to think about. I think someone asked a question as well in the chat, thinking about like, are there examples of where kind of out of school services are connected to in school? And I think that's what we get really excited about now on the funder side, looking for models and examples that are bridging what traditionally happens in school, what traditionally happens out of school, what traditionally happens in the community. All of that can come together, and kind of how we've been framing that through our kind of framework of this multidimensional infrastructure approach, which is like looking at the physical built environment, looking at the role. Someone talked about like, how can technology play a role to connect all the different resources? So the digital infrastructure, and then the social fabric and network. And so looking to bring all of that together to house it in the school, in the community, and have that flow of energy back and forth. And so I'm excited to find, and I love in the chat, people have been talking about examples, to find these case studies, to find these examples, to uplift them so we can all learn to be able to move away from this still being pockets of excellence to being the norm. And so excited that if people have ideas and things that they've seen happen out in their individual communities, please continue to share them so we can uplift them and move forward with that.
Great. Thanks, Josh. So Jane Quinn is a superstar. I've heard your name for a long time. In the center of the community school universe of early leader, and has really helped shape that movement. Let's spend the remaining time, Jane, talking a little bit about community schools, kind of community schools 101. What are we talking about? What do they look like? And what are some of the benefits that you've seen? Maybe even some examples that you've seen that you think are worth us looking up after the summit.
Great. Thank you. Well, there's been a lot of energy in the chat around community schools. I loved reading that, and I'll try to comment on some of the observations that I've seen. But I think the main message that I would like to communicate to our 300 participants today is that community schools is a strategy. It's not a program, it's a strategy for organizing school and community resources around student success. And it's a strategy that's been implemented in this generation for about the last 25 or 30 years. And we know that upwards of 7,000 of our public schools and some charter schools are currently implementing this strategy. So we have a lot of implementation experience. And it's really important, I think, for people who are trying to work in this more comprehensive and integrated way to tap into the knowledge that exists in the field. In our work at the National Center for Community Schools, and I was there for 18 years, we noticed at a certain point, maybe about 15 years ago, that we were starting to hear from districts and from United Ways and community-wide planning groups really about how to create a community school initiative. And I saw some conversation in the chat about how to adopt community schools as a district-wide strategy. And we do now have experience with that. So I think we moved from retail to wholesale in a lot of places over the last 15 years or so. And I really want for people to know how to tap into the knowledge base. So Abe Fernandez is on this webinar. He is now the director of the National Center for Community Schools. I know, Ron, you've had Jose Munoz on another summit. He is head of the Coalition for Community Schools. Those are two national groups who have websites, free resources, lots of information about community schools. So what is a community school? It's a strategy, but it is also a place and a set of partnerships. And this language about partnerships and collaboration has come up over and over again. And I think that the partnership piece of community schools is essential and is a strength, I got distracted by the chat, and is one of the strategies for change.
Right.
because when groups are coming into schools and working in deep collaboration with schools, and I'm thinking about groups like the mental health organizations, the health organizations, the universities that are increasingly getting involved in this work, groups like Children's Aid, that, a 160-year-old wealthy traditional social service organization that is bringing a lot into schools. When these partners work in deep collaboration with schools, it changes their practice on both sides of the partnership. And that, I think, is really very important.
Thank you, Jane.
I'll stop there.
Yes. Well, we're all going to want to go back and look at your websites. And if you have information you want to share with folks, put it on the chat so that we can treat this just as an introduction to the great stories that each of you have. So Ashley, James, Josh, Jane, James, thank you all. And we'll wrap up our conversation and move on to the next segment of the agenda, which we're very excited about as well. We have now a focus really on sort of the dynamic relationship between community planning and school design, and how a city like Boston might be able to point the way toward a more singular approach. Very excited to have Rick Cole, who is our executive director of the Congress for New Urbanism, and will be partnering with us on the work in Georgia. We're especially happy to have Arthur Jemison. He's currently Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for HUD, but was named by Boston Mayor Michelle Wu as the inaugural Chief of Planning for Boston. So Arthur, thank you so much for joining us today. And Rick, the conversation is yours.
Well, thanks a lot, Ron. And let me begin by saying a word about the Congress for New Urbanism. For the last 30 years, since the adoption of the Charter for New Urbanism, our organization has fought for embedding schools in complete neighborhoods. The idea that a neighborhood should be more than a place to live. It should be a place with parks, neighborhood commercial that serve the everyday needs of local neighbors, that they should be complete neighborhoods and have a range of housing that meets every age and has a mix of incomes and therefore a mix of different backgrounds. We've made a lot of progress on that, but I'd be the first to admit that it has been difficult for cracking the wall sometimes between the education system and the neighborhoods that surround them. And oftentimes the education system has made the decision to relocate schools away from neighborhoods, causing folks to have to drive their kids to school, and therefore divorcing the ability to have true community schools. We want to center today's discussion with Arthur Jemison around those communities that we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, those communities where legacy residents, as was described in Atlanta, reap the benefits of the two most important pathways to generational wealth in America. One is education, the other is home ownership. And education and home ownership and the ability of the institutions in the neighborhood and the strengths and advantages in the neighborhood help bolster education in schools and opportunities for young people, but also the spending and the physical capital of our education system also benefits the revitalization, the stabilization of neighborhoods that have been disinvested in for generations, and helps anchor people in their neighborhoods so they can thrive and build generational wealth. We have nobody better in the country to talk about that than Arthur Jemison. He, as was just described, is the principal deputy assistant secretary in the Office of Community Planning in HUD, but he's recently been named and will soon take over as the first chief of planning for Boston's Mayor Michelle Wu, who has charged Arthur with the responsibility not just for reforming Boston's dysfunctional approach to planning that goes back to the dark days of urban renewal, but more so to coordinate across all of the aspects of city government, including schools. And he'll be in charge of $3.6 billion in capital spending over the next 5 years, nearly $800 million of which will be going into revitalizing Boston's public schools. So Arthur, welcome to this webinar. Really appreciate you joining us.
I'm very glad to be here, Rick. Thanks so much for having me. Yes, you did a great preview. There was some of the news just introduced today, according to my colleagues or future colleagues in Boston about the capital investment in schools. I think that's what you're referencing in your comments. But I'm happy to answer questions you have. I guess the only thing I'd say at the outset would be what in preparing for this, based on the questions and conversations we had over email, Rick, I sort of was reminded of a couple of key facts. So in Washington and in Detroit and in Boston, each of those places had a school system that was separate, had separate governance from the city, and so whether that separation sometimes was explicit, there's a different board. In other ways, that separation was it was sort of separated from geographic targeting to some degree, because especially in the case of Boston, there's sort of a limited neighborhood schools arrangement, and there is still busing that takes place, or as still sort of the school choice, but it's sort of a controlled choice approach, I think is the word that they use. So in the big city environments, I see the issue you're talking about is very specific. I also have experience working in Massachusetts on behalf of the state in gateway cities and sort of medium and small communities all across the Commonwealth, which would grapple with this issue that you're speaking to about aligning wealth with and the ability to capture and grow your wealth with the quality of schools. And so that environment's very different, where there are neighborhood and local schools that operate in more tandem with the leadership of the community. So with that background, I'd love to get right into the questions.
It's an important distinction. And given that both schools and cities have limited resources, how do we best mesh the resources that are being spent by both for the mutual benefit of the communities that are served, whether they're the immediate geographic area, or as you've suggested in some schools with magnet schools and busing, et cetera, that's a little bit more complicated. How do we maximize the fact that schools are typically dark on evenings and weekends, and could be utilized as the forum for meaningful services and actually gathering places for communities, particularly communities that have been disinvested in and don't have those facilities or those services at the level that they need?
So I'm very tempted to sort of go into, because I have the experience of three pertinent experiences. One, being 25 years in planning and development, with a lot of that focus on housing. Two, being a parent of three young people, and three, being married to an educator. So, with those three backgrounds, I'm tempted to sort of talk about an experience of Boston that I had, wherein, we had a neighborhood school, which was well regarded. And, in the sort of controlled choice approach that we had, was very competitive and difficult to get into. But pertinent to your point a second ago, we also had the community center for the area was physically attached to the school, and they were able to take advantage of sort of the location and the pool and the swimming pool and a series of other gymnasium resources and a lot of programming came from there that wasn't just associated with the school. The school had the benefit of it during the school day, and as a part of its recreational activities with the students. It also had and the community members, including me and my family, had the benefit of the pool and gymnasium and other programming that was targeted at neighbors. So even though that community school didn't have was not a place that my kids were able to attend because of the lottery, it was a community resource for me and my family. And I think speaks to some of the co-location opportunities, even in an environment where there isn't, where you can't send your kid to the neighborhood school. The fact that the school has resources that come out of it and programming that come out of it that make the neighborhood better sort of speaks to the opportunities. And I'm tempted to let you go back to your question, although I could go for a while on this one.
Well, what do you think are the barriers to having that kind of synergy be the norm rather than the exception?
I would say the barriers are, and I think we're in a unique moment right now where some communities, or every community, because of frankly, because of the resources that came through the acts passed by the Congress in the beginning of last year. Many communities have new one-time resources that they're able to spend. But the short answer is money and programming, right? The spaces become alive and connect to communities, when they exist but the capital is actually typically not as much of the problem as is the support to operate them in a way that thoughtfully allows the co-location of community activities and school. And so the resources it takes to thoughtfully construct or rehabilitate or preserve, and then on the operating side, program and provide programming that's meaningful is a critical thing to mention. I see in the chat folks speaking to this issue. There's also, and again, depending on the alignment of the school with the local jurisdiction and the municipality, because again, there's schools that are operated by the city. There's schools that are operated by charter organizations. There's schools that are operated, and finding ways for all of these places to connect. Each of them has their own set of rules. So there may be opportunities to connect with or use, recreational facilities associated with religious organizations in a community. There may be other ways to connect those things together, so you get a mutuality of purpose from the school and the other facilities. So I want to make sure you have a chance to ask more of your questions, Rick.
So Mayor Wu has explicitly charged you, as her new chief of planning, with coordinating the capital spending that you just referenced. So in Boston, as the case study, looking ahead, how do you envision Boston emerging as a leader in reimagining the relationship between schools and neighborhoods to the benefit of both, and particularly to the benefit of the legacy residents that face displacement because of rising housing and rents?
Well, this is you're catching me on my first conversation about this since the announcement this morning of the new Capitol. When I had a chance to visit with the mayor in person a couple of weeks ago, be in an engagement with the development community, she's talked a lot about the development community's talent needing to be recruited in making the kind of capital decisions that you're alluding to here. I think the vision the mayor has outlined is one where, the BPDA, all the things you said about it are kind of factually supported.
Boston Planning and Development Authority,
yes, for
the era of the urban renewal days, which most cities have moved past, but Boston still has a legacy of doing things behind closed doors that Mayor Wu is determined to change.
Yes, and there's a lot more to say about that, but the key thing is that's where planning has sort of been in a double helix with development interests by design, because the Redevelopment Authority, which is the preceding name for the BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, there was a need to there was a perceived need in 1960 to cut through all of the process and allow more development to take place. And the design of the organization, met its charter. But I think the question is, there were a series of very significant downsides. So back to the point you're making now about the coordination with schools, I think the mayor's vision of planning is that it's not just something emanating from the ninth floor of this agency in a urban renewal holdover. It is activity that happens at parks. It happens in historic commissions. It happens on the streets and walkways. The planning that needs to get done encompasses much more, including schools. So I'm really going to be in a listening mode, especially because as a former Boston parent, the way I look at schools is much more fractured than other than the use of a school for recreation. My view of a school doesn't necessarily reflect my neighborhood per se, because my child might go to a school that's in another part of the neighborhood materially. So in approaching this, I think I look at it more as just a straight capital planning question of looking with the school department at the scopes of work required to accomplish life safety, and then what opportunities the new resources that are being invested provide for us to co-locate other activities that can be programmed out of that space, to make the spaces available in ways that meaningfully connect with the nearby residents, whether there's children or students there or not. I think the vision that I sort of outlined already happening on a smaller scale, happening on a grander scale in again, buildings that are safe and appropriate for children, but maybe have new opportunities to create the site for programming that engages the neighbors and brings them into the school community.
Yeah, there's no question that in a new role, particularly if you're committed to doing genuine community development and civic engagement, that involves a certain amount of listening. Nonetheless, Mayor Wu has a transformative agenda that she won handily and is determined to push through, and that's to really tackle these growing inequities in our big cities, where neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested are now seeing investment come in, which is good, but with the rise of housing prices and the rise of rents, it's pushing many of the people who've been loyal for generations to sustaining those communities out and leaving them having to find housing far from jobs and not necessarily in places that will serve them well educationally. So what based upon your experience in Detroit and Washington, D.C., in the state of Massachusetts and in Washington at HUD, what's your sense about how to really bring the schools and the education system into dialogue to figure out how to solve these issues with the neighborhood and with the city?
Well, I mean, it's not terribly complicated. I mean, I think we have to reach out and engage and say, okay, what you obviously the number of dollars you have allocated here is allocated against a projected scope of work, and then again, you need great professionals to help think about, okay, we need to make this school. We need to prioritize, again, unfortunately, because of the condition of many schools, it's going to need to be, as it is in any other institutional real estate setting, you have to say, how do I get these properties into a place so that places conducive to learning and meet life safety requirements, and then what physical opportunities or open space opportunities, what are the opportunities there to create either slight expansions of use or adaptive reuse of existing spaces that connects people specifically in that neighborhood to more opportunity there. Unfortunately it's a real estate and design challenge, and an allocation of shortages with the scope using the capital you have. I'm really fascinated though by this. By something you were alluding to before that I do want to speak to for a second, which has to do with, the whole question about schools' role in creating areas of high opportunity, and and how, because again, the part of the arts and sciences of our work is really in the physical world and the physical landscape, and there's only so much that we can do in our scope of our span of control, and a lot of it is in those capital decisions, and those physical improvements that we make that help people meaningfully connect to school. Because it's the programming, whether it's community programming or the actual programming of the curriculum in the school, that's going to make it into an area of high opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think as I look to join the city and think about think about what we need to do, I need to be able to say, what's our business proposition to Bostonians who either have a sort of small or large number of choices. How do I make sure that those who have fewer choices, that this community is part of the school, and the programming coming from the school is part of an area of high opportunity? And for people who have more choices, how do I make this business proposition to them that involves the school, involves the open spaces, involves the commercial district, involves the housing they're living in? How do we make that business proposition something that's better than any other place in Massachusetts or in New England? That's really the challenge we have. And with the resources that have been proposed today, I think we have a chance to do that, but it's going to come from the combination of the programming that the school leaders and the community center leaders do, and what we do as planners.
Do you see the opportunity for co-location of affordable housing and schooling, which are two of the biggest issues facing the city?
I do. When you start looking at school properties, in a way where you're opening up the discussion to where we can accomplish it. I mean, one of the issues I'm not sure if it is quite as prevalent in Boston as it has been in other places, but educators not being able to live in the communities that they serve, or educators living in communities that they serve, and in some cases, like displacing or being part of, bidding up rents in areas near the places that they serve. These are challenges, but thinking about looking at the scope of the physical asset we have and the capital we have, and then trying to make smart decisions, but saying, can we locate housing more proximate to this school? Is a way to integrate it into the redevelopment of the school, without unnecessarily curtailing access to open space, other things that people in the community need. Those are exciting prospects.
Well, they are exciting prospects, and as we look at the issue of reimagining America's schools, we'll be looking at your success and Mayor Wu's success in Boston at being a model for reimagining schools and neighborhoods to the benefit of people who have too often been left out, and who have the opportunity through education and through housing to be able to join the American dream and to create cities that work for everyone. So back to you, Ron, and thank you very much, Arthur.
Rick, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks, Arthur. And we'll look forward to hearing more stories out of Boston. And I would say again at this point that we're looking forward, Rick, to working with you and your colleagues at the Congress for New Urbanism as we put together teams of planners and architects to come into Clayton County and to Atlanta. We're pivoting now to the last segment in the agenda. I would say that originally Commissioner Maurice Cox was going to join us out of Chicago. So if you had seen that on the agenda, but unfortunately he became ill. I'm told it's not serious, which is good, but wasn't able to join us after all. So we'll reconnect with Maurice at a future time. So I want to introduce, we've already seen Josh Elder, so good to see you again, Josh. Josh is out of New York, but I didn't mention he's also in Atlanta. We're all converging on Atlanta. And Anne is in Atlanta all the time. She is a community volunteer, a force of nature, and I mentioned earlier, has been taking Josh and me by the ear and meeting everybody that we need to meet in Atlanta. And it's been a fun project so far, Anne. So what I'd like to do, Josh and Anne, is just tee up this last segment. How did we find ourselves here and now? So during the pandemic, we went through 3 phases of work. The first phase we called ideation. And the question we were asking during ideation is, how might the pandemic change public education? Or how should it change public education? And there were 4 drivers that we identified. And this was through scores of meetings and interviews and roundtables with folks from all kinds of different walks of life. And in hindsight, some of it may seem a little simplistic, but these have been the drivers that have been driving us. I guess I would call it programming within school. Maybe you could call it curriculum or pedagogy, but it's what is the student experience in our schools? And the student experience traditionally has been a passive one, but we believe that the changes need to occur around active learning, STEM, STEAM, workforce development is a part of an education conversation. So it's the human programming part. The second is about schools as centers as resources for communities during times of crisis. So many times our schools become an ad hoc resource center for communities in times of emergencies and crisis. Should we think about designing them in ways that help them pivot a little bit more easily during those times? The 2 big drivers, though, were equity and technology. And so that's what came out of our ideation phase. But we're not a think tank. So the second phase we called application. How do we take those drivers and convert them into ideas that are actually implementable? And so on technology, we're really looking at school buildings as generally being designed on a model that in the 1950s, when the most modern and advanced technology was electric lights and indoor plumbing. So how do we make our buildings smarter? How do we incorporate design instead of adding it on? And how do you connect the school and community through technology in ways that will enhance learning and engagement? On equity, we arrived at the application strategy, education-centered community re-engagement, where in communities that are underserved, in schools that are underserved, you really have to embrace the entire ecosystem to lift that community. You can't create great neighborhoods without great schools, and you can't create great schools without great neighborhoods. So that was our application strategy. And now we're pivoting into the implementation phase. So we could have had these panels today and they would have been perfectly wonderful, interesting, intellectually stimulating, but our bias is toward action. So in the implementation phase, we're taking these strategies that we've developed. We've found partners that we'll work with, and that's the City of Atlanta and the Atlanta Public Schools and the Clayton County Public Schools and Forest Park. I said Forest Park earlier, I said Park Forest. Please forgive me, Mayor Butler. And these will be the communities that we bring these programs to. We'll be announcing we're announcing the Clayton County partnership today, but we'll be launching that in just a few more days, May the 19th. And we'll spend our time between now and the end of the summer, the end of the year, working in these communities, advancing these strategies on the ground in real time. So we're excited about that. I'm excited about our partners, and we're developing new partners, but our central partner on this is the Siegel Family Endowment. And you saw Katie Knight earlier and Josh earlier. It seems to me that we're in alignment in terms of our philosophy and our approach and our objectives. And Josh, I'd love to hear your thoughts as we pivot to our local work here in Georgia.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I think for us at Siegel Family Endowment, with our mission being as broad as it is, which is understanding and shaping the impact of technology on society, which is so broad, but then we kind of narrow that down and focus on 3 aspects. So we have our learning, we have our infrastructure work, and our workforce work. And being a national funder, what we've kind of realized and started thinking about this year, and a lot of this was because of our relationship of getting to know the work that you were doing and then having an official partnership, thinking about how do we seize this moment to really reimagine what education and learning should look like. And as you all heard Katie talk about in her panel, thinking about the lens that we have at the 30,000 foot level being a national funder, being able to then bring that down on a regional level and acknowledging that we are not the experts on the local level. And so finding partners, so your Gabbies, your Rubies, and others that are in the community, and thinking about how can we work together? How can we be additive to what's happening? How can we convene and bring others, be catalytic, but really drive and support innovative solutions that are homegrown, that are contextualized for the community? And I think that's what we are really excited to think about with this work, not only with Atlanta, with Clayton County and Forest Park and others, but just thinking about how can we best support from the national side to filter down what we've seen to be able to apply it to what's happening regionally and make sure that information flows back up to a national level, because there's so much learning that can happen in this approach. And so we're just really excited to be a part of this learning journey and excited to share out what's happening. And so thank you for the opportunity. And Anne, so grateful for all the learning that we have experienced and what's happening in this context, and for all of the partners on this call and future partners that we'll meet. And so just really appreciative for this opportunity.
So Anne, I'd like to introduce you if I can. I have never worked with anyone who's as generous and passionate about helping her community as Anne Kramer. And I've never seen anybody who seems to know everyone in town. So Anne has been a wonderful partner, and look forward, we hope, to continuing to work with you as we move into this next phase. And your conversation with the Clayton County and Forest Park mayor will be enlightening in the sense that it takes all of these concepts and theoretical discussions and brings them home. So we turn it over to you, Anne, to introduce the panel, and look forward to your discussion.
Right. Oh, thank you, Ron, so much. And Joss, it's been a joy and a pleasure. It's so fun. I will say the whole idea of readiness, timing, and serendipity has played into this amazing relationship with Clayton County and Forest Park, as well as the city of Atlanta and Atlanta Public Schools. It's so fun just even today to have the conversations be so primed for the conversation you'll hear from our amazing panelists from Forest Park and Clayton County, where you see the convergence, the collaboration, the coming together of the philanthropic sector, the local political leadership, the community, the education system, options for learning. You've seen Dr. Beasley's amazing prolific responses of all the things that are already going on in Clayton County, and yet we're not done yet. There's an opportunity for even more amazing collaboration between the city of Forest Park and Clayton County Public Schools, and how it can create that kind of environment, whether we call it a community school or we call it Amazing Reimagining America's Schools, where we have a collaborative that enhances the lives of the neighbors, the people in the community, especially the students and the educators. So it is a joy, joy, joy for me to introduce this amazing panel. And today we'll sort of talk about the why did they accept being a part of this project? And then what do they think to do? Implementation, by the way, innovation. And then what do they expect from the results? And in the panel, we have the four who will make it happen. Dr. Morcease Beasley, who is our Clayton County Public Schools Superintendent. Mayor Angeline Butler, who is the mayor of Forest Park, Georgia, whom we are so excited to get to work with. Dr. Timothy Guiney, who is, as we call it, the cluster leader for the school, Forest Park Middle School, of which we have the principal, who is one of my favorites, is Ms. Monique Drury. And so among that continuum, you see, we have all the players in place. And from the Reimagining America School, you'll see where the planning comes in, the housing comes in, the parks come in, all the things that can create this community. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Beasley, since you sort of were the first one to say yes. Why did you say yes to this?
Oh, and you only gave me a minute, but I'll try to share why I said yes. You know, we're at a good place in our school system with our Board of Education. We have a 9-member board led by Chair Gorey, as you know, and Vice Chair Straker. They've approved a wonderful facilities enhancement plan that includes a new Forest Park Middle School. And I thought of the word intersectionality, wherein we're talking about active learning, technology, design of our spaces, community schools. Forest Park is a designated community school, and just the entire experience for students in our school system. And I thought, you know, when Ann reaches out to you at the right time, as you said, serendipity, at the right time to help create a partnership that we really need. I've tried to list several partnerships that we already have in the district in the chat space, but the partnership was just one we needed. Miss Principal here of Forest Park Middle School came to mind. We reached out to her and she was, of course, very receptive. Dr. Guiney, who supervises that school, was very receptive. The mayor had already begun supporting that school. Our board, of course, has been very receptive and supportive. We just thought it was the right time. And we're excited that right now a new facility is in design. And if we're going to do it right for the benefit of children, this is the time to have that conversation and to build this partnership.
Well, and it's never easy, though, is it, Dr. Beasley? And so for you, Mayor Butler, you talk about funding streams, mutual benefit, mutual gain. Tell us, Mayor Butler, why did you say yes to this? You could have been sitting on the porch.
Yes, I could have, but there is no better way that I could imagine spending my day here than with everyone here. So thank you for this amazing opportunity. And let me just say, so from the genesis of my first term to this juncture, my goal and my vision for Forest Park has been progress. And so when you hear the word progress, you envision onward momentum. But I'm about to blow you guys completely away. So for me, progress is an acronym. Are you guys ready? All right, take your pens out. Progress stands for political restoration, opportunity, and growth for residential, economic, and social success. And so, and part of that is also the collaboration piece. And you can speak on each pillar independently, but there is no better manifestation of progress than with advancing the city forward and embracing a more progressive educational model that expands the idea of for how and what schooling should look like for today's youth.
So
I don't know where I am on time. I could go on and on and on.
Honey, that is perfect, okay. Because it is difficult because you have to give up, give in, but mainly you get better. I love it. Yes. Thank you, Mayor Butler. And progress it is. For you, Dr. Guiney, it's just one more thing on your to-do list. Why did you say yes?
It was easy for me to say yes. When Dr. Beasley said yes, I said yes. But
good answer.
Yeah, that was it. But really, my role is to support Forest Park Middle School and be a liaison with the district. So I already knew from having many conversations with Ms. Drury daily, weekly, about her various partnerships with Forest Park Mayor Butler and the community. They're deeply engaged, and the work really was a great launching point for this. And one thing I will say also as well in relation to Mayor Butler, since Mayor Butler has been in office, she has connected very closely with our district leadership. But I have 3 schools, 1 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high school in Forest Park, and she reaches out to the principals and she goes to school events and she invites the schools to community events So there's already a partnership that is a two-way interaction. So it really is just a collaboration that I think we all look forward to.
I think you just nailed one of the chief criteria, is having that positive political leadership, the partnership with the district and with you, Principal Drury, with that local school. Tell us why you said yes.
As my colleagues have said, it was an easy decision. We've all heard the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. The village has changed over the years, and I've watched this community change. We were a community school before that was a designation. I heard Dr. Beasley say that. We were dealing with food instability, financial, and as a result, job instability. So we were dealing with all those basic needs, but we were working almost in isolation. We didn't have the true community partnerships, and the ones we had, the school initiated. So when looking at the work that Reimagining Schools brings to us, and watching Mayor Butler and working with her over the years, this was the right time. They had already said, we want to improve our community. They've invited not only me to events, but my students. We've had, our students have had a voice in this work that Main Street is doing. So my kids know that when they're called upon, their voices are being listened to. So this was an easy yes for us.
I love it. So now the work begins. What do you expect to do? So, okay, Dr. Beasley, what is it going to take?
Well, first of all, with anything, it takes leadership, right? And so I think we've got the leadership in place. We've got the support. Now it's just a matter of rolling up our sleeves and going through the process. Anything worth producing is worth going through a good process to produce. So it's a process. And fortunately, we have, of course, you, Ann, we've got Ron, Reimagining America Schools. We've got the Siegel Foundation. We've got all of these entities that will help us go through this process. Clearly, they have experience doing this work, and we're going to be the beneficiaries of their experiences. We're going to be another example of success that they'll be able to really put on a national stage and say, look at what's done here in Clayton County Public Schools. We're excited about the design of our facilities, what's happening in Forest Park. So honestly, and we're not, we're used to hard work here in Clayton County. So it's just another area that will benefit our community, our children, and we look forward to it. So, but just to answer the question, rolling up the sleeves and getting it done, Ann.
I think that's what it takes, always a little perspiration gets you down the street. But also what I love hearing, and Mayor Butler from you too, is a collaborative resources. I saw in the chat, does it have an auditorium? Well, the whole idea, you're doing Main Street as you're part of your downtown economic development. Tell me what it means for you when you say, what does it take to get it done?
So I heard the word serendipitous thrown out earlier, but it's also a carpe diem, right? We have to seize the moment that is before us. And Dr. Beasley hit it, the nail right on the head. Like, but the relationships have already set the foundation for us moving forward. He and I have an amazing relationship. Ms. Drury and Dr. Tim, like everyone said, the foundation has been set, and that's being intentional with our collaborations. But we also have to make sure we're creating our own narrative. And just a quick story, when there was an article that went out that listed Forest Park and a couple of other cities in Clayton County as one of the worst places to live. And so when Dr. Beasley reached out and said, look, we were equally appalled. We have to issue a joint statement because all of their matrix was wrong. We didn't know where they got their data from. And I don't know if the article was ever published, but we collaboratively issued a joint statement to let people know what is truly going on in our school systems and our municipality, because when people move into a municipality, they're also buying into a community and our schools as well. And we're going to make sure that everybody knows, again, as Dr. Beasley said, all of the amazing things that's truly going on here.
I love it. And the collaboration and reducing the silos, telling the story, and having Reimagining America School and the work of the Siegel Family Foundation will help you be the catalyst to tell that story.
Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Tim, yes, ma'am. Dr. Tim and Ms. Drury, what's going on with you when you hear it? Hard work from Dr. Beasley? What's hard work like?
what is hard work like.
Every day.
I only have a minute. No, one of the things that I realized in my 10 years being principal here, this is a two-way relationship. And so as a school, we need to make sure that we're doing our best job in creating opportunities for the community to actually engage with us. So making sure that we're inviting them to everything that our students are doing, and then being able to leverage technology so that we can showcase our student successes. So we realize that with the pandemic, we can do a lot of things virtually. And so people can still support us without physically being in our building. But we're going to have such a beautiful building. They'll want to be here. So, but we want to make sure that when they're here, that of course we're adding value to each other's lives. So that's going to be the work that we're doing right now.
Excellent. And Tim, what's going on?
I look forward to the work with Reimagine America's Schools, Forest Park, the city of Forest Park, Ms. Drury, and the community. I think one of the things is this process is something that is beginning for us, and we don't exactly know how it's going to play out. We're going to involve and hear the voices of our students, our parents, our community members. But one of the things that's exciting for me is not knowing and being open, because if we think that we know and we have ideas that are predisposed, it's a hindrance to creativity. And I think one of the pieces will be that we really can be open, because there will be a time that, and this Forest Park Middle School and the city of Forest Park, this is being built for our young people now, all of our people, but it's also being built for the future. And there will be a time when I won't be here, Dr. Beasley won't be here, Ms. Drury won't be here, but Forest Park Middle will be, and that will be 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, where it's just still a place that is flexible and an outstanding place that's a centerpiece of the community.
Oh, perfect. And if why don't we start here? You've already the segue of sort of that last word as we close out. And I'm going to close out with have you, Dr. Beasley, have the final word. So Dr. Guiney, if you'll give your kind of final advice, sort of, this is innovation and open. And, do you have any more we let Tim, right? More to say. One more final word.
Innovation, flexibility.
Ooh, I like it. Thank you. Ms. Drury.
I have two, because I want to say creativity and collaboration.
Oh, nice. And that goes to the students too. Mayor Butler, progress.
Progress, yes.
And I love it. Any other wonderful last words?
No, progress and being intentional.
I love it. Okay, Superintendent Beasley, final word and final advice.
Well, I'll just say, as we reimagine America's schools, America is a quilt of communities, right? We're one community. And a quilt is often, has so many qualities about it. Just remember, the school is a part of that quilt. Families and individuals, they're a part of that quilt. Businesses, they're a part of that quilt. So whenever you think about your school community, you should think about all of these entities working seamlessly together, interacting, supporting one another, partnering, all focused on our children, ensuring that they get exactly what they need. I'll close by saying we're redesigning, we're reimagining, we're re-engaging, we're repurposing in order to ensure that our students have every opportunity afforded to them that will give them an improved, increased quality of life. That's what it's all about. It's everybody. You mentioned inclusion, you mentioned equity. It's everybody. Everybody's got to make the honor roll, and period.
Everybody. I love it. So now everyone on this call can see why Clayton County and Forest Park are part of the next iteration of Reimagining Schools. The readiness, the timing, the relationships, the opportunity to create that community for everybody. And we are so grateful for this particular extraordinary team. So Ron, thank you, and Josh for the opportunity. We're ready. Thanks.
Whoa, I hope we can keep up with this group, Ann. People around the country are very envious of us that we get to work with such a can-do group of folks, both at Clayton County, Forest Park, and Atlanta and the Atlanta Public Schools. So Here's the last part of the agenda, the wrap up. Dr. Guiney talked about not knowing, but being open. You know, we must find new strategies for our youth and for our communities. We must resist the temptation to be drawn back into the comfortable ways that we've always done things. And each of us, those of you in the audience and those that have been on the panel, need to bring that sort of willingness to step into a process that combines not knowing and being open. And then Mayor Butler says, big words, carpe diem, you know, seize the moment. And I guess I would conclude by saying that we really shouldn't see that we have a choice. We must lean into change. What's the old saying? If not now, when? If not us, who? So my colleagues and I step up to that challenge, and we know that doing this is important, and we're excited to have partners like those you've seen today. And we appreciate the amazing enthusiasm in the audience through the chat. And each of you bring leadership to your communities and your institutions as well. So we look forward to seeing you in the future, and we'll share our good stories with you as we start our work on the ground in Georgia. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of this.